Have you ever heard of a sultan who was a brilliant composer, a visionary reformer, and ultimately a tragic hero? Today we're diving into the dramatic story of Sultan Selim III, a ruler who tried to save a dying empire but was consumed by the very forces he sought to change. Imagine this. It's 1789. The French Revolution is shaking Europe, and the once mighty Ottoman Empire is on the brink of collapse. Years of military defeats, a bankrupt treasury, and powerful European neighbors circling like vultures painted a grim picture. This is the world Selim III inherited when he ascended to the throne. He was only 28, but he saw the writing on the wall. The old ways were failing. The empire was stuck in the past while Europe was leaping into the future. Selim knew that without radical change, the Ottomans were doomed. So, what was his master plan? It was a bold, ambitious program called the Nizam-i Djedit, which means the new order. The heart of this plan was a complete overhaul of the military. For centuries, the Janissaries had been the elite fighting force of the empire, but by Selim's time, they had become a corrupt and undisciplined political power, more interested in protecting their privileges than defending the state. They were a shadow of their former glory, using outdated tactics and weapons. Selim decided to build a new army from scratch. This new order army was a game changer. Soldiers were recruited and trained according to the latest European methods. They wore modern uniforms, used up-to-date rifles and cannons, and learned disciplined drills from French and other European officers. To fund this expensive project and bypass the corrupt old system, Selim even created a separate treasury, the Irada Shedid, or new revenue. This was meant to ensure the money went directly to the new army, not into the pockets of greedy officials. This wasn't just about new soldiers. It was about creating a modern, professional fighting force capable of standing up to the armies of Russia, Austria, and France. But Selim's vision went far beyond the battlefield. He understood that military might was tied to diplomacy and knowledge. For the first time in Ottoman history, he established permanent embassies in major European capitals like London, Paris, Vienna, and Berlin. Before this, the Ottomans had only sent temporary envoys for specific missions. This was a monumental shift. These new ambassadors weren't just there to sign treaties. They were spies, observers, and students. Their job was to report back on everything: new technologies, political alliances, military strategies, and even cultural trends. The empire was finally opening its eyes and ears to the West, moving from a policy of proud isolation to one of active engagement. This was Selim's attempt to bridge the gap and learn from his rivals. Now you can probably guess what happened next. When you try to change a system that's been in place for centuries, you make a lot of enemies. And Selim III made some very powerful ones. The first and most dangerous group was the Janissaries. They saw the New Order army as a direct threat to their very existence. If this new force succeeded, the Janissaries would become obsolete, losing their power, their prestige, and their handsome paychecks. They were not going to let that happen without a fight. Then there were the conservative religious scholars, the ulema. Many of them viewed any imitation of Christian Europe as a betrayal of Islamic tradition. They preached that adopting Western military drills, uniforms, and institutions was a path to corruption and damnation. They provided the ideological fuel for the opposition, framing Selim's reforms as an attack on the faith itself. Finally, you had the entrenched bureaucrats and local notables who had benefited from the old corrupt system for generations. They were skimming off state revenues and enjoyed immense power in their provinces. Selim's attempts to centralize control and create a more efficient, transparent government threatened their wealth and influence. Together, these three groups, the Janissaries, the conservative clergy, and the corrupt elites, formed a powerful alliance of resistance, a perfect storm brewing just beneath the surface. As if internal enemies weren't enough, Selim III's reign was plagued by external crises. The empire was still entangled in costly wars with Austria and Russia, which drained its resources. Then, in 1798, a young and ambitious general named Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Ottoman Egypt. This was a massive shock. The French army, a product of modern European military science, easily crushed the Ottoman and Mamluk forces. The invasion of Egypt starkly revealed the empire's military weakness to the entire world and made Selim's reforms seem more urgent than ever. It also forced the Ottomans into complex and shifting alliances with Britain and Russia to drive the French out. Juggling these powerful allies was a delicate and dangerous game. Selim was fighting fires on all fronts, trying to reform at home while fending off invaders from abroad. The opposition to Selim's new order grew stronger each year. It started with grumbling and quiet sabotage, but by 1807 it exploded into open rebellion. A revolt led by a Janissary auxiliary named Kabakçı Mustafa broke out in Istanbul. The rebels demanded one thing: the complete abolition of the Nizam-i Djedit. They marched on the palace, and tragically, Selim found himself isolated. The new army he had spent years building was stationed outside the capital and couldn't protect him. His government ministers, fearing for their own lives, caved to the rebels' demands. In a heartbreaking turn of events, Selim III was deposed and placed under house arrest in the Topkapi Palace. His reforms were dismantled, the New Order army was disbanded, and the empire seemed to slide back into its old ways. His cousin was placed on the throne as Mustafa IV, a puppet of the reactionary forces, but the story doesn't end there. A year later, in 1808, a powerful provincial governor, Alemdar Mustafa Pasha, who remained loyal to Selim's vision, gathered his army and marched on Istanbul. His goal was to crush the rebels and restore Selim III to the throne. As his army stormed the palace gates, the new Sultan, Mustafa IV, made a horrifying decision. He ordered the execution of both Selim and his other cousin, Mahmud. In the chaos, assassins broke into Selim's chambers. Accounts say that Selim, the composer Sultan, fought back bravely with a small dagger but was ultimately overwhelmed and killed. By the time Alemdar Mustafa Pasha's men reached him, it was too late. They found his body. The great reformer was dead. His assassinators were later executed, and his cousin Mahmud II became the new Sultan. But the tragic loss of Selim cast a long shadow. Beyond his political struggles, it's important to remember Selim III, the man. He was a person of great culture and refinement, a gifted poet and an accomplished composer of Ottoman classical music. His compositions are still performed and admired today. His court was a center of intellectual and artistic life. This cultural side of him shows a ruler who was not just a military modernizer, but an enlightened individual who cherished his heritage while striving for progress. So, what is the legacy of Sultan Selim III? In the short term, his reign ended in failure. His reforms were overturned, and he paid the ultimate price for his vision. But in the long run, his ideas didn't die with him. He planted the seeds of change that would blossom decades later. He was the first sultan to truly recognize the need for comprehensive Western-style modernization. The path he forged, though tragic, laid the groundwork for the more successful reforms of his successor, Mahmud II, who would eventually destroy the Janissaries and revive the modernization effort. Selim's reign is a powerful and poignant chapter in history, a story of a courageous leader caught between a glorious past and an uncertain future. He was a man ahead of his time, a symbol of the timeless struggle between tradition and progress. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the life of Sultan Selim III. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most compelling figures. Let me know in the comments what you think about Selim's reforms. Was he too ambitious, or was his failure inevitable? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.